So thank you everyone for joining our Open Documentation Hour. There's on the Open Documentation Academy itself, we have a few issues that are open, and if you're interested in getting involved, take a look at the GitHub repo for that. I've also restructured all of the recordings for these documentation hours on the YouTube playlist so that they're easy to navigate and topic based, so that at least you know what we've been talking about in each of those. If you've been wondering, that's after feedback that we've gotten, and Vladimir helped me with that as well. This is something that I made a mistake and mistakenly delayed from an earlier planned schedule for the documentation hour, and Robert is going to talk about AI and whether it's a force for good in documentation. I don't know whether or not he's generated this in AI or not, but I think we'll find out in a minute. So I'm going to hand it over to Robert now. Thanks, Robert.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I did try. So while I'm going to be setting up the sharing, let me assure you that I actually made a presentation with the use of AI, and it kind of sucked. So I'm not going to be using it. This is not the one. Yes, let me present. How do I do that? Mode, editing command, no, slideshow. All right. So I'm going to be talking about documentation and artificial intelligence, and more specifically about large language models, or LLMs. Of course, I'm pretty sure that everyone's aware of the explosion that has been happening these past couple of years. The technology has existed before, but with the advent of OpenAI and their ChatGPT, this has really gotten into the mainstream. And of course, documentation being text and these being generative models, there are a lot of questions about their use in developing documentation. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at some of the caveats, and let's talk about how useful or not useful the LLMs can be. So in these very few slides that I prepared, more of a background in order to have some sort of an anchoring. I'm going to be talking about the possible problems. Those I have divided into two categories, and the first is it true? Then is it okay? And then I would like to have a discussion with all of you about your experiences and so forth. And yeah, let's get started. Everybody knows that the generative large language models can, take a prompt and output some information. That information can be useful. It may not be useful, but there are certain considerations that need to be taken into account if we were to be using them for documentation, the output. Now, let me preface it by saying that these considerations are nothing new, and they're nothing specific to AI or to large language models. Every technical writer, or self-respecting technical writer, would need to take these things into account when working on documentation, or when considering some content even developed by a human before putting their name on it or before publishing it. What is different are the different, the sort of a point of view, or there are some aspects to using generative AI models that make these considerations slightly different. And let's discuss those differences, and let's look at some of the details. So first of all, is it true what the large language model would tell you? There are probably two main considerations in this regard, and that is whether it's factual and whether it's up to date. I'm going to be talking about both. When it comes to factuality, then the most important factor is, of course, the data set that the language model has been trained on. some people would even say that the language model is learning. It is not learning, because artificial intelligence is very artificial, and it is not, in fact, intelligent. But let's talk about that in a little while. As I said, the most important thing is the quality of data that the language model is being fed. And as I put it over here, it takes good documentation to produce or to get good documentation out of a language model. That sort of is an answer in and of itself, because without quality content, without somebody developing quality content, the language model cannot be taught to use it and to generate other information based on that. Of course, it can help tremendously in collating data, in simplifying information, and so forth. But it needs to have correct information in the first place. So I put in here this bullet point about the human in the loop, which is actually essential. The human in the loop needs to first start on the information, and then it needs to also be the sort of a gatekeeper that checks whether the output of the language model is correct. Now, in this regard, there is one important thing to mention, and that is that unlike what we might be used to with other computer programs or other applications of computer technology, where the input-output relationship is usually very deterministic. Unless there is a bug in the code that creates some sort of an unexpected output, then if you feed a program correct data, then some form of correct data is going to be output. Now, of course, even if it is a bug, then depending on what kind of a bug in the code is, there still is a very deterministic way of finding and knowing what the output is going to be. It's going to be flawed based on a specific bug, and that bug, in a repeatable manner, is going to produce the same wrong output. So it is very deterministic. That is not the case with large language models. They are generative, and that sort of encapsulates the problem. If you feed or if you train a large language model on correct data, there is no guarantee that it is going to output correct data, or that the information that is going to come out of it is going to be also correct. There is no guarantee of that. There also is no guarantee that if you ask the language model the same question over and over again, I'm sure many of you have tried, that is going to produce the same data, that the output is going to be the same. It is not. So even if we take correct data, we feed it into a large language model, we have no way of knowing whether the output is going to be correct as well. Now, if you go to ChatGPT or Gemini or any one of the other models that are available online, and you ask it something, you have no way of knowing what the data set it has been trained on. Basically, you can assume that it's been the entirety of the internet, or the creators of that language model have at least tried to feed it as much data as possible. Of course, they have also tried to sort of sanitize it, but not on the input, but on the output, that they try to put in some restraints that are designed to sort of prevent unwanted output that could be either hugely incorrect or in some ways undesirable, such as being overly racist, or advising people to go and kill themselves, or that kind of stuff. But if you look at it only from a technical communication or technical documentation point of view, you still have no idea. Of course, there are ways of mitigating that problem. As I mentioned, you can feed it your own data. You can even use open source language models that you can download and try on your own computer, and try to train those language models on a very specific subset of data that you have. All of the commercial providers, such as OpenAI and Microsoft and Google, they also offer this kind of a way of limiting the way that their language model is applied. You can pay them to use the software that they use for the language model to train it on a specific set of data that you provided. You can also, be quite diligent in the way that you submit the prompts to the language model. You can try to be very specific in trying to limit the scope of the information that the language model considers when it generates its answers. But that runs into another problem that needs to be mentioned in this regard, in the factuality regard, and that is that all of this involves the so-called NLP, natural language processing. And natural language inherently is ambiguous. And it's this ambiguity influences both the way that the language model understands, quote unquote, understands, because it doesn't really understand, the way it interprets your prompt, your question, or your the thing that you ask of the language model. There is no guarantee that it's going to correctly interpret what you have asked. Also, there is no guarantee that it's going to correctly interpret the data that it has been trained on. Because as I mentioned, and now coming back to it, that it's not really intelligent. If I were to overly simplify the way large language models work, we could say that they parse the input data, looking for patterns, and they use some arguably very sophisticated, but still statistical and heuristic methods to try and determine in a quantifiable manner what the relations are between those patterns. So while it's all pretty nifty, it still is a whole lot of mathematics, basically. So it's not intelligent learning, and it's not intelligent output that is produced. It is still just comparing individual pieces of data and trying to determine what pieces are important, in what way they can be combined. So that's about the factuality. If you go to ChatGPT, it's actually going to tell you this. So the creators, they are aware, and they sort of hedge in this manner to make sure that people metaphorically don't scold themselves with hot coffee that does not have that designation on the cup. But let's go forward. Let's look at the whether the data is up to date. Now, of course, when I said that the most important aspect is the training data set, that also means that there always is some sort of a cutoff date that the language model is trained on. And if again, ChatGPT would tell you that its training data set only goes up to October of last year. So, if there was a piece of software that was released after that, chances are that the documentation that ChatGPT is going to provide you with about that particular piece of software, it's not going to consider that new version. But that's understandable, and you can keep it in mind, but it's an important consideration. Another consideration outside of the cutoff dates is also that, of course, if it produces some information, that information, like any documentation, at some point is going to grow obsolete. Now, if a human is looking at a piece of documentation, they've got a much easier job of determining what needs to be updated in the documentation. Because as I mentioned, the language models, they don't really understand information. They're just looking at content as a whole bunch of data points. So they, while it is very much possible for a language model to consider a piece of input, such as a documentation that was generated before, and try to update it or try to determine what has become obsolete in that content, it is still very much guesswork for them. And the guessing has gotten pretty good, but again, it's an important consideration that need to be kept in mind, because if you ask a language model to update a piece of documentation, as I'm sure many of you have tried, the results can be quite entertaining. And finally, in this regard also, about the truth quality of output that can be generated by a language model. The security, and what I mean by that, as I mentioned before, if you feed it incorrect data, then chances are that incorrect data is going to be coming out of it. But the fact is that because it is a generative model, and it looks at content and it looks at the data very much statistically, there is a thing that needs to be taken into account, and that also comes into consideration in the "is it okay" part, but that it tends to amplify problems. If there is a bug in the data that it is being trained on, then chances are that the bug is going to surface in the content that is produced, but also chances are that the bug in the produced content is going to be more prominent than it was in the data that it was trained on. And then, of course, there could be malicious actors. There have already been cases of language models being fed data that was intentionally incorrect, or that was intentionally skewed in a certain direction. And because, again, coming back to it not being intelligent, it does not really know that there is bias in the data that it is being fed. So, if there is some malicious intent, then the data that is going to be produced then can be tainted by that in a very serious manner. And finally, accountability. That is, let's say that you produce a piece of documentation with the help of AI, and you very specifically limit the training data set that the language model is going to be using, and that you do your due diligence, and you check that everything is correct, and so forth and so forth, and then somebody uses it and there is a problem. Well, you have published it, so it basically is up to you, and you are accountable no matter who produced that content, whether it was a language model, you or your colleague, or you just swiped it off the internet. You are accountable. But let's say that you have a documentation chatbot. Now, that documentation chatbot is going to be generating output based on some input. And as I mentioned, there is no guarantee that even if it is being fed correct data, that is going to provide correct data on the output. So who is going to be accountable in that regard? Is it going to be the person or the company who provided the code for the chatbot? Is it going to be the person who put that chatbot into deployment? Is it going to be just the company? Is it going to be the person who, or the organization that provided the training data set? Now, none of these are insurmountable problems, but they need to be taken into account with these specific points of view that are actually specific to AI and content generated by it. Now let's go to the other part. Is it okay? And by that I mean specifically if it's illegal, and that comes back to the accountability, and also if it is ethical. Now I have touched upon basically all of these points before, but let's go over them briefly. Now, first of all, you have no guarantee that the output of a large language model is not going to contain some sensitive info, because sensitive information can be fed into the training data set either maliciously or inadvertently, or the language model can infer some stuff that can become sensitive in the way it is being generated. Secondly, copyright, that's a pretty straightforward consideration. You don't need to own the copyright to all the training data, but there is a specific consideration about the copyright and the licensing of the output, and about attribution, of course. The liability is pretty much the same thing as the accountability that I was mentioning before, and there's a bit of a crossover between the security and the legality of the output, and compliance with various things. Now we're crossing over into the part where we're asking whether it's ethical. Like, for example, GDPR is a very specific consideration, and that brings us to the last part, and that is, of course, the language that is being produced is influenced by various factors. But as I mentioned before, if there is some sort of a problem in the training data set, it will probably surface in the output. I've mentioned the amplification of biases. That is something that the bias can be in a technical form, a bias towards incorrect information, or a bias towards using one solution over another, even though it may not be advantageous to whoever is using the content. But the bias can be also in a very, like, a sort of a human regard, and that is language models basically have a very little notion of what is considered hurtful or what is considered not okay in all kinds of points of view. It can be, as I mentioned, for example, racist, like it can be misogynist, and so forth. Again, because of the generative nature of the language models, this is something that is very hard to sort of keep under wraps and make sure that that stuff does not surface in the output. And finally, there's the transparency. Again, this is not something that would be totally not obvious, but it needs to be taken into account, because you want to be very explicit about the fact that something has not been produced by whatever, a department or a human or something, that it was actually produced by software, that it was something that is not directly attributable to a person or to an organization. So again, let me underline this by repeating that none of these things are like a showstopper. All of these were, when carefully considered and when taken into account, they can be worked around, or they can, when dutifully considered, a human that is doing whatever, a review, can flag these problems. But there needs to be specific focus on many of these, and the problematic content that is coming out of a language model would in many ways differ from the problems that would be apparent in a content that would be created by a human. Okay, so I've talked about the potential problems. I've talked about how the language models can be usefully deployed in generating content, and now I want to hear from you what your experiences are, what models you have tried, and also there's one thing that as I mentioned, everything that's generated by an LLM, of course, needs to be reviewed just like any other content before it's being published. But with AI available, one thing that sort of is apparent is that one language model could be used to check on the stuff that was output by another language model. And I tried this, and to my surprise, the results were much better than in many of the other applications. Like you may have, some time ago there were these memes when the personal assistants such as Siri or whatever the name of Microsoft's was, and this Google Assistant, when they were pitted against each other, and they would be having conversations from one phone to another, and they would be sort of dueling. If you try that approach with language models, the results are surprisingly not bad. If you have Gemini generate an instruction set about doing something, and then you ask ChatGPT to fact check it, then it's not, as I said, it's not half bad, and I was surprised by that. And I would be interested in what you have tried and what you have observed.
Oh, thank you, Robert. That was. It always seems to verge into philosophy. But yeah, this is open to everybody. If anybody wants to ask a question or make a comment or respond to what Robert said, please feel free to do so. Maybe I can ask you something, Robert, to start off with. What kind of documentation have you tried to use AI to produce or help produce? What do you kind of envisage it helping?
Yeah, so I've sort of intentionally not gone into the practical applications because everybody could have different ideas about that. But before I directly answer your question, let me sidestep a little bit, and that is, I think that it's like with many other things. People would say that fire is a good servant but a bad master. I think that the language models can be considered as such. If you rely on them and do not do your fact checking, then that's not a good thing, and it's going to lead some bad results. But if you use it with consideration and with sort of keeping in mind those points that I have mentioned in the presentation, then it can be a really very good servant. And I have tried it with producing stuff like when you've got a writer would say that they've got a writer's block, then what the language models can very much help with is sort of being the starter point, getting you unblocked. So let's say that you're looking at a document that needs to be simplified, that has been written by somebody a very long time ago, and now you need to just spruce it up. You need to reformat it. You need to make sure that it's up to date. You need to make sure that it conforms to some sort of a template, let's say, and so forth. A language model is very useful in helping with that. You can just say, okay, well, consider this page on a part of a document, existing documentation, and in a very concise manner, provide me with a summary or something like that. And because that is, for the language model, this is a very simple exercise. You're not actually asking them to produce new information. You're not asking it to, find a solution for you, and so forth. Many of you have probably heard about AI hallucinations. There even is a Wikipedia page about large language model hallucinations. And endearingly and also dangerously, I would say that we're sort of anthropomorphizing the language models and saying that they hallucinate. Of course, they do not hallucinate. They just produce crap. But because of the generative nature of the language models. But what I'm getting at is that if you ask it for a solution to a problem that you have, yeah? Let's say that you want a piece of code that is going to solve some your problem, or you want a new function that you would apply to an existing piece of code that you have. The language models as they're apt to just take the shortest path towards producing something. And you can very easily try it by asking them some sort of a not very complex, but let's say tricky math question. And they would spit out immediately the result. And if it's wrong, they would say, oh, I don't think that's correct. And the language model would say, oh, certainly. Thank you for pointing it out. The correct answer is in fact this. I have forgotten to factor in that whatever something, or it makes stuff up in that it would invent a Python library that is not existent, but it would claim that you can use its functions, and it's just because it is not considering real information, like basic Google search or DuckDuckGo can provide you with a pretty sophisticated calculator just in that prompt. You can use it to convert money. You can use it to do calculations. And it's very possible for a language model to do the same. It's not that the computers that are running the language model would be incapable of doing that calculation. It's just that its concern is not correctness of the output information. It is just the ability to combine the information gathered from the patterns that it has parsed the input data for in a in a sort of a believable manner. I could have mentioned in the presentation that when you ask a language model something, its chief goal is to provide output that on the surface is believable. And it is doing a very good job of that. It can actually produce a complete nonsense that sounds very correct. It sounds like a university-educated person would just put something into a very succinct sentence, even though it's complete bullshit. Back to what you were asking about. It is very useful when you're not actually asking it to generate information out of nothing. But if you ask it to provide a summary, or if you ask it to provide you with a bunch of points that could help you on your way, or if you ask it to suggest first steps and so forth, then in that way, it is actually supremely useful, and it can save a whole lot of time. And also, there is one other thing, that is like when something is really well documented already, but it's just a bit of a pain to look for the information, then the language models that the sort of vanilla standard versions that are available, they tend to be very good at that. Like that very detailed documentation exists about a specific piece of software, something, but you can't be bothered to figure out how to do something with that software. Then the language models usually will serve you well, because there is just the input information is just so plentiful that chances are that the output is just going to be eminently usable.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anyone who wants to make a comment or ask anything? Please go ahead. Yeah, Vladimir.
Yeah, I'm totally on your side when we talk about generating some kind of a plausible result which looks legit, but actually it's just a solid generated nonsense sometimes, at least sometimes. These hallucinations, the best I've seen is actually just hallucinating some references to some publications, like a proper article name with a proper author that does not exist anyway in our universe. It feels like a parallel universe, really. And actually, the most terrifying thing I know about this kind of behavior of LLMs is actually when you start. Well, actually, I read an article about people participating in bounty hunting process by submitting generated results, which are literally just bullshit generated by LLMs submitted. So real experts in this just wasting their time trying to get through these like legit application for the program and trying to understand where is the catch, why I'm not getting this error, why I'm not getting, why is this a problem, and the worst part is they answer like, can you clarify why you're thinking this is a problem? And LLM generates them another answer trying to explain, but this explanation doesn't have any substance. It's just dragging you on. It's basically wasting everyone's time. So this kind of attempt can be easily automated. So basically you can waste time in like huge scale of any project, and it will cost you little to nothing to do that. And that's scary.
Mingus said search engine-based AI tools like Find and Perplexity give references for the content generated are very helpful. I mean, my experience, I think we've covered this a little bit, has been, I was really interested in it to begin with, and I've kind of lost quite a lot of my excitement for it. But I do find it very useful as like in the same way I'd perhaps used to use a thesaurus. You talked about writer's block, Robert, and I do find it useful when I know there's a way to simplify an idea and I just can't get my head around restructuring it in my own head, to put it into ChatGPT or Gemini, the two that I've used, and that seldom actually gives me the answer, but gives me a different angle of looking at the same problem and a different way to think, or even just you're having a conversation with yourself in a way, which outside of your own scope. Yeah, Dimalola, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for this insightful session. So I just want to kind of emphasize some of the things Robert said, which I find very useful and has been helpful. I feel for generative AI, it's always like more useful when you use it like for specific tasks. If you like it to a large extent, it depends on your mindset. So if you have the mindset like you are not using it to do your work for you, you are probably seeing it as an assistant to help you like automate some specific instances. Like for instance, it could be helpful in something like summary, summary, or even after like doing some fact checking yourself, reviewing the grammar and all. You can feed it to AI to also help you like get some details that you missed out, like check grammar of this information. So there might be some things that you missed out, some minor details you missed out. It's going to give you out. And just like we use Grammarly, you don't just straight away like use it like that. You try to check it out. Like for instance, I've used it in instances whereby you give it specific instructions to even check the grammar, and it's going to generate a whole new content, even though that's not what I asked it to do. So in those instances, what I would just say is like, okay, list out the changes you made. So I'm going to look at it word for word, and surprisingly, sometimes it will give you information like this should be this, but they are the same thing. So I'm going to tell you like this is the same, and it's going to be like, oh yeah, sorry for that. This is actually the same thing. So yeah, they are not really perfect, but when you use it for specific instances and you do your, they are really useful. Also, the idea of like trying to use multiple models also works well. Because for instance, ChatGPT might miss some things. You can use Claude AI to like proofread or like do the same thing again, and it's going to get some things ChatGPT misses. I also think they also have their strengths. Like for instance, when you are like checking for anything technical, maybe grammar related and stuff like that, I think Claude AI is way better. I also think when you are looking for trying to check accuracy and stuff like that, I think Perplexity is better because it's going to give you references of links you can check. Just like it's more like an automated Google search, which means you do the manual labor yourself. So I feel like I said earlier, like, yeah, you can't really rely on it. So you can't rely on it, and I think it's even way better when you're already very experienced at the task that you want it to do. Because if you're not experienced, you just take whatever you get as it is. That's all for me.
Thank you. Thanks, Dimalola. Yes, Pamela, go for it. If you're muted, if you want to. Yeah, we can hear you.
One question I had, I've always kind of used open source, but I wasn't really familiar with the details of the copyright licensing. And so one idea that came to my mind was, well, if everybody thinks that Arch documentation is so good, well, could they agree that, okay, well, we're open source, so we'll share it with you, so you just run it through the AI, and then you could have whatever comes out and tweak it for Ubuntu. I don't know, is that so to what extent are other distributions actually willing to just actually share out their documentation outright?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I don't have an easy answer because as far as I know, even the Creative Commons and copyleft licensing, it's yet to be tested and fully clear whether text or projects licensed with such licenses can then be used as the source for large language models, which then don't share their models as the data. And I don't know. And I suspect you'd need an input far bigger than even like the Arch Wiki to generate something that would generate, proper implicit output. But I mean, personally, I think that this is a great opportunity for open source in this way. If we're able to keep that kind of innovation within the same kind of garden, so the models are open and the data sets are open, and maybe I'm hopeful that that might happen, and then we could use it for open source documentation. So Mariga said, I'd like your thoughts, Robert and Graham and others, on prompting. What strategies have you found to work? Any guides? I'll come back to you, Pamela. I haven't got any great strategies personally. It's usually quite a long conversation. It'd be great to actually share screenshots of some of the conversations that I've had to try and elicit the right. I end up being quite rude and explicit at the end of it, and very similar to the way that you used to use Google, and you'd have to filter out with the minus symbol the results you didn't want to, or use double quotes to make sure you include verbatim terminology. I still feel we're at that phase. I don't know if, Robert, you've got any thoughts on how you craft a prompt?
Naturally, I've tried to read up on that. There's actually a whole lot of guidance. You can even buy seminars on how to do good prompts for various purposes. And I read a couple of articles, and I try to understand the way the language models interpret the prompts. So some things that come to mind are that I'm sure that you have noticed that the language models tend to be quite verbose. They sort of delight in lots of gibberish. They provide a lot of extraneous verbiage, that you might not be really interested in. But so it works very well if you actually instruct the model to be concise. I have found that pretty much accompanying any prompt by saying either upfront or at the end of it something like, do it in a concise manner, that forces the model to be much more economic with the output. And it has served me well in that the information provided was sort of distilled into just the most important parts, or the stuff that the model thought was the most important. And yeah, that's one thing that that has really worked quite well.
Thank you. Just before we get to Pamela, I missed Hank U off-road. AI summary plugin for Q&A forums like Discourse is helpful to summarize a wall of text, by which I mean QA solutions. I think that's very true. That's a very good use of it. Yeah, back over to you, Pamela.
Oh, one thing that I've been using AI for is language learning, and I'm learning 2 languages, Spanish and Greek, and so I put it into a translator, and I see that the output actually gives different conceptions of what I'm trying to say, but maybe that could be helpful in training the AI to as a second check as to whether the concept is correct. And so I wonder also if it might, I don't know how much of Ubuntu is translated into other languages. Have anybody, have you guys tried using that for regionalization?
That's another great question. I don't know the answer. In fact, all of the localization for Ubuntu is done by the community, by volunteers in their respective locales. I'd love to know the answer to that question. Actually, maybe I can, or we can reach out to the community team at Canonical and who work with these people to ask them if they've. I'm sure they've considered it, but I don't know. I've certainly heard of professional products using, well, making people redundant basically and replacing them with large language models for translation or translation that's done dynamically.
The one problem with that is that what people sometimes fail to consider with documentation in the first place is the maintenance aspect. As we all know, developing and publishing documentation usually is the smaller part, and then the overhead of maintaining the documentation, making sure that it doesn't go obsolete, is considerable with any documentation. So let's say that you have AI translate a documentation set, but you don't really have a translator who would be able or willing to dedicate time and capacity to maintaining that different language, then chances are that it's going to soon grow obsolete because there's not going to be anyone who would be in charge of maintaining that documentation set. So in this regard, if we don't really, if it's not just a helper tool, I think that the language models and the specific AI applications that are intended for translating can be awesome as a helper tool to an actual translator. If there's a translator who just wants to make their life easier, then using this, that's great. That actually works pretty good, and I've been impressed by the quality of the translation that I've seen. I mean, even stupid Google Translate is pretty good these days. But if it would be without having a translation, a person, department, a volunteer, then I think that the better application would be just providing a software solution that would allow anyone visiting a piece of documentation to click a button and say, okay, translate this for me into such and such language. Because then the source of truth would be only one still, and there would not be a separate documentation set that would need to be maintained.
I've had a couple of comments. Hanky Offroad says Weblate, not AI, is used as a translation platform for Fedora. I think that's a very popular service that a lot of open source projects use. And Moiga says AI can definitely help in translation, accessibility, internationalization. The thing, this is a big thing, and then we've only got a couple of minutes left. I want to leave a bit of time at the end. But the thing that I often wonder is whether documentation will become more dynamic for the reader or the user, and whether that's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing, whether AI models running in our browser basically understand our intention and restructure and reformat documentation according to our abilities and our needs. I wonder if it'll ever get to that point. Yeah, Vladimir, go for it.
Sorry. I think it all goes that way, isn't creating some kind of dialogue there. So user comes to you, and instead of reading this text, they will ask, how do I do this? How do I do that? So you see tailored experience. But the other side, like the downside of this actually, is that you cannot guarantee the experience. While you can engineer the experience for your tutorial and users who are going through, for this kind of behavior of the bot, you cannot guarantee the result, even if you try. That's how LLM works, right?
Yeah. And this is something that actually Robert mentioned at the very beginning, or in his the slides, that humans have a much easier job of determining what needs to be in the documentation, what makes effective documentation than they. So I'm going to leave the last comment to Uniter, who says, having worked as a technical translator, the terminologies are very specific. Thus, AI models, not fact-checking definitions, make it difficult to use AI for localization. Thank you all so much for taking part in this. Thank you, Robert, for putting the presentation together and teaching us a little bit about AI. You have such deep thoughts about it, and it was a really interesting discussion. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we'll have a few minutes late afterwards if anyone wants to bring up anything. Thank you. I'll stop.